What if your greatest gift became your death sentence? What would you choose? A comfortable lie that grants you life, or a terrifying truth that could save the world? Could you stand alone, accused and forsaken, when the only one who believes you is the ancient god you are meant to imprison? The air in the temple of Enki was thick with the scent of dried myrrh and old stone, a fragrance Mirathea had breathed for 60 years. At 87, her bones knew the chill of the pre-dawn hours better than the warmth of the sun. Her silver hair, a cascade of moonlight against the deep purple of her robes, seemed to glow in the dim light of the single oil lamp. Before her, on an obsidian pedestal, rested the scrying bowl of Enki, filled with water so dark it looked like a pool of liquid night. The vision came not as a picture, but as a sensation. A cold, metallic taste at the back of her throat, the smell of ozone after a storm, and a pressure in her skull that threatened to crack it open. She saw it then, great, shadowy forms descending from a sky the color of bruised flesh, their forms shifting and immense. The ziggurats of Uruk, the pride of the Sumerian Empire, crumbled to dust without a sound, and on the throne sat not King Namtar, but a figure of pure, voracious shadow, wearing the crown of the world as a shackle. It was the return. The Anunnaki were not coming. One was already here, waiting to be unleashed. Mirathea gasped, wrenching herself back from the bowl. The water splashed, dark droplets staining her wrinkled hands like ink. Her heart, a frail bird in a cage of old ribs, fluttered wildly. This was the forbidden vision, the one the sacred texts warned of, the one King Namtar had explicitly decreed could not exist. Mother Mirathea? A voice, soft as silk and sharp as a needle, cut through the silence. Ishera stood at the entrance to the sanctum, her own robes a less vibrant hue, her black hair perfectly coiffed, her eyes, the color of dark honey, took in the scene. The disturbed water, the old woman's pallor, the tremor in her hands. The dawn rituals await. Are you unwell? It is nothing, child, Mirathea said, her voice a dry rustle. She willed her hands to still, her heart to slow. A passing tremor of the spirit. It has passed. But the lie tasted like ash. She saw the calculation in Ishera's eyes, the flicker of ambition quickly masked by concern. Ishera, her most gifted, most ambitious student, the one who hungered for the title of High Priestess with a fire that sometimes frightened Mirathea. The day proceeded with the somnolent rhythm of ritual. Chants rose to the sun god Utu. Offerings of grain and wine were made, but Mirathea moved through it all as if in a dream, the vision a shard of ice in her soul. She felt the weight of the forbidden knowledge, a crown of thorns pressing into her thoughts. To speak it was treason. To silence it was a betrayal of every oath she had ever sworn. That evening, as the sun bled out over the Euphrates, the silence of the temple was shattered by the tramp of iron-shod boots. The great cedar doors of the main hall swung open, and King Namtar entered, his presence sucking the warmth from the room. He was a man carved from ambition and paranoia. His beard, black and intricately oiled, could not hide the cruel line of his mouth. His eyes, a startling and unnatural shade of rust red, scanned the hall as if looking for threats to crush. The golden crown upon his head, fashioned like a cluster of radiant suns, seemed less a symbol of divinity and more a weapon of weight. He did not come alone. Flanked by his commander in Merkur, a giant of a man with a face marred by an old scar and eyes that held no light, the king strode to the center of the hall. The priestesses knelt. Mirathea alone remained standing, her posture straight, a gnarled oak against a gathering storm. High Priestess Mirathea, Namtar's voice echoed, devoid of warmth. A troubling report has reached my ears, a whisper of sedition, of prophecies that seek to undermine the divine order. Mirathea's gaze remained steady. She did not look at Ishera, who stood slightly behind the king, her head bowed in a perfect pantomime of remorse. The gods speak many things, your majesty, Mirathea replied, her voice clear. It is our duty to interpret, not to silence. Do not play the wise elder with me, old woman. Namtar snapped. his composure cracking to reveal the fury beneath. I speak of a specific vision. A vision of the Anunnaki's return. A vision you dared to summon. He gestured, and in Merkur stepped forward. In his massive hands, he held small, locked chest of cedar wood. With a twist of a key, he opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were clay tablets covered in the spidery. Ancient cuneiform of the forbidden texts, texts that were meant to be sealed away, known only to the High Priestess. A cold certainty settled in Mirathea's stomach. Only one other person had access to that chest. Ishera, Mirathea said, the name a quiet sigh of sorrow. The younger priestess finally lifted her head. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. Forgive me, mother, but my loyalty must be to the crown, to the living God who walks among us. Your fantasies would plunge our empire into chaos. The betrayal was a physical blow, sharper for its perfection. Mirathea looked from Ashar's feigned grief to Namtar's triumphant glare, to Merkur's stoic, unreadable face. She saw the trap, beautifully laid. So, Namtar said, a smile playing on his lips, you stand accused of treasonous prophecy. You can, of course, recant, declare the vision a falsehood, a product of an aged and failing mind. You will be stripped of your title, but you will live out your days in a quiet temple by the sea. He paused, letting the offer hang in the air, a gilded cage. Or, he continued, his voice dropping to a malicious whisper, you can prove your conviction. You can demonstrate the truth of your words before the gods themselves. Mirathea knew what came next. A chill deeper than the temple's stone seeped into her bones. The Anunnaki Tomb has stood for 4 millennia. Namtar declared for the benefit of the assembled priestesses, whose terrified whispers filled the hall. 127 souls have been sent to seek audience with the slumbering gods within. None have returned. You claim a connection to them? Then go. Prove it. If you emerge with their blessing, your truth will be acknowledged. If not, he shrugged, the tomb will have claimed another mad woman. The choice was no choice at all. A life bought with a lie was a prison of the soul. A death faced for the truth was a form of freedom. Mirathea drew herself up to her full height. The lamplight caught the emerald green of her eyes, and for a moment they blazed with an ageless fire. She looked not at the king, but through him, towards a destiny she had always known was waiting. I will not recant a whisper from the divine, she said, her voice ringing with a final, unshakable authority. Chain me to your gods, King Namtar, for I am already condemned. A collective gasp rippled through the temple. Ishar's mask of regret slipped for a single, satisfying instant, revealing shock. In Merkur's stony face twitched almost imperceptibly. The old priestess had chosen the tomb. The heavy scent of lotus incense in Mirathea's private chamber could not mask the new, acrid smell of despair. The gilded doors, once a symbol of her authority, were now barred from the outside, guarded by 2 of Merkur's stone-faced soldiers. She was a prisoner in her own sanctuary. The initial surge of defiant energy had ebbed, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of her fate. The Anunnaki Tomb. The name alone was enough to still the hearts of the bravest warriors. It was not merely a prison. It was a mouth of madness, a place where time and sanity unraveled. She traced the intricate carvings on her obsidian staff. Each groove a memory of a long life spent in service. Was this her reward? To be devoured by the very darkness she had sworn to guard against? A soft, rhythmic tapping at the hidden panel behind her tapestry broke the silence. A moment later, the panel slid aside, and Ninlil, the blind seer, crept in. Her milky white eyes, unseeing, were wide with distress. Mirathea, she whispered, her voice rough with urgency. By the gods, tell me it is a lie. Tell me you did not confess to the forbidden vision. It is the truth, old friend, Mirathea said, her voice weary, and the truth has chosen to claim its price. Ninlil stumbled forward, her hands finding Mirathea's shoulders, gripping them tightly. You fool. You noble, magnificent fool. Why did you not lie? Namtar's throne is built on sand. His divinity is a story he tells himself. You could have outlived him. And what of the vision, Enlil? Mirathea placed a calming hand over her friend's. I saw it, not with these old eyes, but with my soul. The shadow on the throne, it is Nergal, the banished one. He stirs. The tomb is not just a prison, it is a lock, and the lock is weakening. A fresh wave of terror crossed Ninlil's face. Then your fate is sealed twice over. To enter is to die. To succeed is to unleash hell. Before they could speak further, the main door unbarred and Shala, the herbalist, slipped inside, her arms full of linen bundles and clay pots. Her face was pale, her movements frantic. They would not let me see you, she hissed, setting her burdens down. I had to bribe the guard with a week's worth of poppy tincture. She began unpacking with practiced efficiency. Here, concentrated lotus root for calm, powdered mandrake, a tiny pinch under the tongue for pain. And this, she held up a small, unassuming vial of clear liquid, distilled from the ghost cap mushroom. It will not save you from what is in that tomb, but it can separate the mind from the body. A final mercy, if you need it. Mirathea looked at the vial, a cold shard of finality. Thank you, Shala. Your loyalty is a balm. The loyalty of many is with you, Mother, Shala said, her eyes glistening. The temple is divided. Ishar's faction preaches a new, harsh doctrine of obedience to the living God, but many of the younger priestesses are terrified. They whisper of your sacrifice. And Ishara? Mirathea asked, though she dreaded the answer. Ninlil spat on the floor. She holds court in the lesser hall, speaking of necessary purges and a new era. She wears your absence like a new robe, preening in the space you left behind. As if summoned by their words, the door opened again. This time, it was Ishara herself. She stood for a moment, silhouetted against the torchlight of the corridor, her expression unreadable. She had changed her robes already. She now wore the deep crimson edged with gold thread, the official garb of the acting high priestess. Leave us, she said to Ninlil and Shala, her voice cold. Shala looked ready to argue, but Mirathea gave a slight, weary nod. The two older women left, shooting venomous glances at Ishara as they passed. The door closed, leaving the mentor and the student alone in the flickering lamplight. The silence was a chasm between them. You have what you wanted, child, Mirathea said, not looking at her. I wanted the truth to be served. Ishara's composure broke for a single, sharp instant. Your visions were becoming inconvenient. You questioned the king's edicts. You spoke of restraint when we need strength. You clung to dusty old scrolls while the empire moves forward. Mirathea finally turned her gaze upon her. You confuse motion for progress, Ishara, and you confuse power for strength. What you have done is not strength. It is fear. You are afraid of a future you cannot control, so you have sold your soul to a tyrant who promises you a piece of his. Ishara's face flushed. He is a god. He has brought us victory, prosperity. He has brought us the silence of the grave, Mirathea countered softly. A silence you will soon inherit. Tell me, when you are alone in this chamber, with only the whispers of your own conscience for company, will it feel like victory? For a long moment, Ishara said nothing. Her hands, clenched at her sides, trembled slightly. A flicker of the bright, idealistic young woman she had once been crossed her features, a ghost in the machine of her ambition. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, replaced by a hardened mask. You chose your path, Mother, she said, her voice flat and cold once more. And I have chosen mine. The king's men come for you at dawn. May the gods you serve so faithfully have mercy on your soul, for the tomb will not. She turned and left, the sound of the bar sliding back into place echoing like a tomb seal in the silent room. Mirathea was alone again, but the scent of Ishara's perfume, jasmine and something sharper metallic, like ambition, lingered in the air. The final, fragrant evidence of the betrayal that had condemned her. Outside, she could hear the faint, hysterical sobs of the young oracle, Arata, who had surely seen the darkness that awaited. The pieces were in motion, and the game was for the world itself. Dawn arrived not with gentle light, but with the grim finality of hammered iron. The sun was a bloody smear on the horizon as the gates of Uruk swung open, not for trade or conquest, but for a single, somber procession. Mirathea, stripped of her priestly vestments and clad in a simple, rough-spun gray tunic, stood between Enmerkar and two of his royal guards. The weight of her years felt heavier now, a physical burden pressed upon her shoulders by the stares of the silent crowd that had gathered. King Namtar was not present. His message had been delivered, but from a high balcony, Queen Damkina watched, her face a pale, expressionless mask. As Mirathea's eyes met hers, the queen's hand, hidden in the folds of her gown, briefly opened, revealing a small, rolled parchment before it disappeared. A tiny, dangerous gesture of solidarity. It was a spark of warmth in the freezing morning. The journey began in silence, the only sounds the crunch of their sandals on the gravel path and the jangle of the guards' equipment. The lush, irrigated fields surrounding Uruk soon gave way to the scrublands, and then to the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Crimson Desert. The air grew hot and dry, carrying the scent of dust and sun-baked stone. Enmerkar led from the front, a brooding, silent monolith. He did not look back at his prisoner. For the first day, they traveled without speaking, the desert stretching out in all directions, an ocean of rust-colored dunes under a merciless sky. It was on the second evening, as they made camp in the lee of a wind-scarred rock formation, that the silence was broken. One of the younger guards, his face slick with sweat and fear, muttered to his companion, "They say the tomb breathes, that it whispers to you days before you arrive, driving you mad, so you run straight into the jaws of the beast within." "Hold your tongue, Jabin." Enmerkar's voice cut through the darkness, sharper than the desert cold. "Superstition is a weapon for the weak." The guard fell silent, chastised. Enmerkar tossed a waterskin to Mirathea. She caught it, her movements slow but deliberate. "You do not believe the tales, Commander?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. Enmerkar poked a small fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "I believe in stone and steel, and the orders I am given. The rest is smoke." "Stone can hold an echo," Mirathea replied, taking a sip of water. "And steel can be twisted by things that have no form. The Anunnaki were not men in Enmerkar. Their prisons are not built for men." He finally looked at her, his scarred face illuminated by the flickering flames. "Why? A woman of your age, your wisdom. You could be sipping wine in a seaside temple. Why choose this?" "Because a cage of lies is still a cage," she said, holding his gaze. "And I have been a keeper of truth for too long to now become its jailer. Tell me, Commander, do you ever question the orders you are given? Or does the steel of your sword extend to your soul?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. It was the first crack she had seen in his stoic armor. He looked away, into the vast, star-dusted darkness. "My duty is to the crown. It is a simple thing. It keeps a man from complicated thoughts." "But you are not a simple man," Mirathea pressed gently. "I see it in your eyes. You carry the weight of your duties. You do not wear them lightly. You know in your heart that sending an old woman to a mythical tomb is not an act of divine justice. It is an act of fear." He stood up abruptly, the sound loud in the quiet night. "Get some rest. We reach the foothills of the mountains of Lamashtu tomorrow. The tomb lies beyond." His tone forbade further conversation. The third day of travel was harder. The terrain grew rugged, the path climbing steadily into the barren, jagged foothills. The air grew thinner, and the sky took on a bruised, purple hue. A strange, low thrumming seemed to vibrate up through the soles of their feet, a sensation that was felt more than heard. It was then that they saw it. Carved into the face of the blackest mountain peak was an entrance. It was not a grand, architectural marvel, but raw, gaping wound in the rock, shaped roughly like a downward-pointing spearhead. There were no columns, no carvings, no steps. It was an absence, a void that seemed to swallow of the very light around it. Before it stood a small, fortified outpost, a grim testament to its perpetual guard. As they approached, the commander of the tomb's guard, Nergal, emerged to meet them. He was a lean, hardened man with a black beard and a patch over his right eye. His one good eye assessed the group with a weary, cynical intelligence. In Merkur, Nergal greeted with a nod that was more acknowledgement than respect. His single eye then fell on Mirathea. So this is the one, the witch of Uruk, who talks to gods. He did not sound impressed. He sounded tired. This is the prisoner, and Merkur confirmed, his voice gruff. The king's justice is to be served. Nergal's gaze swept over Mirathea, from her silver hair to her worn sandals. He did not see a witch or a traitor. He saw an old woman, standing with a dignity that defied her circumstances, her emerald eyes taking in the terrifying entrance to her tomb with a calm that unnerved him more than any scream would have. The 128th, Nergal murmured, almost to himself. He gestured to the dark opening. The antechamber is prepared. The chains are waiting. He looked at Merkur. Your duty is nearly done, Commander. Mine is eternal. Mirathea took a last, deep breath of the free, cold mountain air. She could feel it now, a pull from the darkness, a cold whisper against her mind. It was not a scream of terror, but a sigh of recognition. She turned her back on the sun, on Merkur, on the world she had known. Without a backward glance, she walked towards the yawning blackness. Merkur watched her go, the old priestess's final words echoing in his mind. A cage of lies is still a cage. For the first time in his life, the steel of his certainty felt brittle. As the shadows of the tomb swallowed her whole, he felt not the satisfaction of a duty fulfilled, but the heavy, chilling weight of a terrible mistake. The transition from the world of light to the domain of stone was absolute. One moment, the cold mountain wind whipped at Mirathea's tunic. The next, there was only a profound, suffocating silence, broken by the grinding of a massive stone slab being pushed into place behind her. The last sliver of daylight was extinguished, plunging her into a blackness so complete it felt solid. The air was stale, ancient, carrying the scent of dry dust, cold granite, and something else, something metallic and alien, like ozone and old blood. For a moment, panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in the dark. She forced herself to breathe, drawing the dead air deep into her lungs, focusing on the familiar ritual of inhalation and exhalation. This was the first test. To succumb to the fear of the dark was to die before the real trial had even begun. Her eyes began to adjust. It was not a true light, but a faint, phosphorescent glow emanating from the walls themselves. The stone was veined with a pulsing, greenish-blue mineral that cast long, dancing shadows. She was in a rough-hewn antechamber. Ahead, a narrow corridor sloped steeply downward, disappearing into the bowels of the mountain. The pull she had felt outside was stronger here, a tangible current in the still air, drawing her deeper. It was not a voice, but an intention. Come. Her sandals whispered against the gritty floor as she moved forward. The corridor was a tight squeeze, the ceiling so low she had to stoop. The glowing veins in the walls pulsed in a slow, rhythmic pattern, like the sleeping heartbeat of the mountain. She reached out a hand, brushing her fingers against the stone. It was unnaturally cold, and a faint vibration hummed against her skin. These were not just rocks, they were a containment system, etched with power. After what felt like an hour of descent, the corridor opened into a vast, cavernous space. Her breath caught. This was no natural cave. The chamber was a perfect cylinder, impossibly high, its walls covered in intricate, glowing cuneiform that spiraled from floor to a ceiling lost in shadow. In the center of the chamber was a dais, and upon it, set into the stone floor, were two heavy iron manacles, connected to chains that vanished into slots in the dais itself. This was the place, the nexus, the prison within the prison. As she stepped into the chamber, a sound reached her, slithering through the silence. It was a dry, scaly rustle, the sound of something massive coiling and uncoiling over stone. From a dark crevice high on the wall, a shape detached itself. It moved with a fluid, sinister grace, descending the sheer rock face. It was a serpent, but of a scale that defied nature. Its body was as thick as an ancient tree trunk, covered in iridescent black scales that shimmered in the eerie light. A wedge-shaped head, larger than a shield, lowered towards her, and two slitted eyes, burning with a faint orange ember, fixed upon her. This was Anzû, the beast guardian. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing fangs that dripped with a viscous, shimmering fluid. The metallic scent in the air grew stronger. Mirathea stood her ground, her staff held tight. She did not look away from the creature's gaze. She poured all her will into a single, clear thought, projecting it not as a challenge, but as a statement of purpose. I am not your prey. I am here by the will of the ones who bound you. The great serpent paused, its head cocked. A low hiss, like steam escaping a fissure, filled the chamber. It seemed to consider her. Then, slowly, it withdrew, melting back into the shadows from whence it came, though she could still feel its malevolent presence, watching from the dark. She had passed the first guardian. Her relief was short-lived. As she approached the dais, a new sensation began, a whispering. It was not a sound that traveled through the air, but one that bloomed directly inside her mind. So alone, so tired, you need not be. The voice was silken, seductive, layered with a wisdom that felt ancient and profound. It was the voice of a tuku, the whisperer. They cast you out for speaking the truth. We value truth here. We value strength. Mirathea closed her eyes, trying to shut it out, but the voice was within her, coiling around her thoughts like smoke. The chains, see how crude they are. For mortals, for criminals, you are neither. You are a vessel, key. She could feel a pressure building behind her eyes, a tempting image forming in her mind. Herself, standing not as a prisoner, but as a queen. The chains shattered at her feet, power flowing through her, ancient and limitless. Just a touch to thought, and you could be free. We could both be free. No, the word was not spoken aloud, but roared within the sanctum of her own mind. She slammed her mental defenses shut, the discipline of a lifetime of meditation forming an adamantine wall. The seductive voice recoiled, replaced by a flicker of cold, amused anger before it faded, though its presence lingered at the edges of her consciousness, waiting. Shaken but resolute, Mirathea stepped onto the dais. The iron manacles were cold and heavy. With a final, steadying breath, she placed her thin wrists into the cold, rough circles of metal. As she did, the cuneiform on the walls flared with a sudden, blinding intensity. The symbols seemed to writhe and rearrange themselves, the ancient script acknowledging her presence, binding her to its purpose. The chains in the slots groaned and tightened of their own accord, clamping shut with a final, deafening clang that echoed through the chamber like a funeral bell. She was bound, not just by iron, but by fate. In the profound silence that followed, broken only by the faint, psychic echo of Atuka's whisper, Mirathea looked up at the swirling, glowing script on the walls. She was the 128th. She was the prisoner. But as she felt the immense, slumbering power of the tomb settle around her, a new, terrifying understanding dawned. She was not just a sacrifice. She was the new warden. And the prisoner she was meant to guard was now awake, and he knew her name. Time lost all meaning in the tomb. It was measured only in the slow, rhythmic pulsing of the wall glyphs and the creeping ache in Mirathea's limbs. The chains were not merely cold iron. They were conduits, leaching the warmth from her body and replacing it with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in her very bones. Hunger and thirst were distant, trivial concerns, pushed aside by the overwhelming psychic pressure of the place. The whispers of Atuku were a constant, maddening drizzle on the edges of her mind. They have forgotten you. Your precious king sleeps in a warm bed. Your student wears your robes, while you rot for a truth they could not bear. She built walls within her mind, brick by psychic brick, focusing on the memory of Ninlil's grip, Shala's herbs, the faint scent of lotus incense. But the whispers found cracks, painting vivid pictures of Ashara's triumph, of the temple's halls falling silent, of her life's work turning to dust. It was during one of these assaults, when the vision of a decaying Uruk was most vivid, that the chamber changed. The ambient greenish glow of the glyphs flickered, dimmed, and then coalesced. The light did not brighten the chamber. Instead, it drew back, thickening the shadows until they congealed in the center of the dais, directly before her. From this pool of absolute darkness, a form began to rise. It was not a body of flesh, but of solidified shadow and captured light. It was tall, imposing, clad in the ghostly fragments of armor from a forgotten age. Its face was a shifting, indistinct mask, but within that darkness, 2 points of crimson light ignited, fixing upon her with an intelligence that was vast, cold, and utterly alien. Nergal, the banished one. The psychic pressure in the chamber intensified 1,000-fold, a weight that threatened to crush her spirit. The whispers of Atuku fell silent, replaced by a voice that was not a sound, but a direct imprint upon her soul. It was the grinding of continental plates, the cold of interstellar void. You have come. The words were not English, not Sumerian, but pure concept, hammered into her consciousness. Mirathea's breath hitched. Her carefully constructed mental walls felt as flimsy as parchment. You are not like the others. They came with swords and fear. You came with silence and purpose. Mirathea forced her own thought into the void, a single, defiant spark. I came with the truth. A wave of cold amusement emanated from the form. Truth, a flickering candle in the cosmic night. Your truth is what bound you here. My truth is what will set me free. The shadowy form gestured, a languid, contemptuous motion. An image bloomed in Mirathea's mind, not a whispered suggestion, but a crystal-clear vision. She saw herself, not old and frail, but in the prime of her life, her body thrumming with vitality, her silver hair now a flowing river of moonlight. She stood not in this tomb, but in a restored Uruk, its ziggurats gleaming, the people kneeling not to Namtar, but to her. She saw knowledge flooding her mind, secrets of the stars, of life and death, power beyond mortal comprehension. This can be yours. Nergal's voice was a seductive caress now. They called you witch. I will make you a goddess, a queen. You have been a servant long enough. It is time to rule. The vision was intoxicating. It spoke to every secret yearning, every frustration of a long life spent in service. It was the perfect answer to Ashara's betrayal, to Namtar's cruelty. All she had to do was let go. And the price, she thought, her mental voice trembling. A simple thing, a gesture of goodwill. The form leaned closer, the crimson eyes boring into her. The chains that bind you are part of the seal that binds me. They are psychic as much as physical. Release your will. Let them fall. That is all. Your freedom for mine. Your ascension for my return. The true meaning of the Kehanet crashed down upon her then, not as a vague prophecy, but with the clarity of shattering glass. Nergal's return was the end of the world. He was not a mere disgraced god. He was a fundamental force of chaos and destruction, bound by his own kin for the safety of all creation. The tomb was not his prison, it was a dam, and she was the new keystone. The tempting vision of godhood evaporated, replaced by a horrific countervision. The sky tearing open, cities dissolving into screaming dust, the earth itself bleeding shadow, all of it flowing towards the triumphant form of Nergal. She saw her choice with terrifying simplicity. To say yes was to become a goddess of a dead world. To say no was to remain its eternal, forgotten guardian. She lifted her head, the chains clinking with the movement. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was dwarfed by a vast, unyielding resolve. She looked directly into the twin suns of Nergal's eyes. No, she whispered aloud, her voice cracking but clear in the silent chamber. The word was a pebble thrown into a cosmic ocean, but its ripples were immediate and violent. The shadowy form recoiled. The crimson eyes flared with incandescent fury. The psychic pressure became a physical force, slamming into her, driving the air from her lungs. The very stone of the dais trembled. You dare. You, a flea, a speck of dust, dare defy me. I who have seen galaxies born and die. The voice was no longer seductive. It was the roar of a star going supernova. You will die here. Slowly. I will feast on your agony for eons. I will. You will do nothing. Mirathea interrupted, a strange calm settling over her. The confrontation had crystallized her purpose. You are bound, and I am the bindings. She focused her will, not on attacking him, but on reinforcing the chains, on the glowing glyphs on the wall. She poured her life force, her memories, her very identity into the ancient prison. The greenish light flared brighter, pushing back against the oppressive darkness. Nergal's form wavered, his rage turning to a soundless, universe-spanning scream of frustration. The vision of him dissolved, not with a bang, but a hiss, the shadows retreating back to the corners of the chamber. Silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. Mirathea slumped in her chains, utterly spent, her body trembling with exhaustion. But within her, a new fire had been kindled. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a warden. She had faced the tempter and refused him. Alone in the dark, chained to a god, Mirathea the condemned began her eternal vigil. The bargain was rejected. The war had begun. Time in the world above became a river flowing past a stagnant pool. Seasons turned. The reign of King Namtar, the merciless, stretched on, its foundations subtly rotting from within. In the tomb, there was no sun, no moon, only the endless, silent war in the dark. Mirathea's body should have succumbed. Thirst, hunger, age, they were laws of mortal flesh. But the tomb defied such laws. The same energy that leached warmth from her bones also sustained her. A cruel paradox. She did not thrive. She persisted. Her body grew thinner. Her skin, like parchment, stretched over fine architecture of bone. But her emerald eyes burned ever brighter, reflecting the pulsing glyphs. She was becoming a part of the tomb's ecosystem, a hybrid of woman and monument. Her days were a cycle of vigilance and memory. Nergal's direct assaults had ceased, replaced by a more insidious warfare. Utuka's whispers were now tailored, precise. Ninlil weeps in the night, her blindness a mercy. Shala's herbs cannot cure the sickness in the city. The pox, they call it, a gift from your beloved king. Mirathea clutched the small, hidden vial Shala had given her, the ghost cap extract. A final mercy. It called to her in moments of profound despair, a sweet promise of silence. But she always tucked it away again. To use it was to abandon her post. Her greatest weapon against the silence was the echo. She discovered that if she focused her will, she could project her consciousness, not to escape, but to listen, to touch the world she had left behind. It was a dangerous exercise, leaving her psychically vulnerable, but it was her only tether. She felt Ninlil first. Her old friend's spirit was a familiar, warm ember in the vast darkness. Mirathea would send a wisp of comfort, a psychic touch as gentle as a sigh. She felt Ninlil's moments of quiet strength, her whispered prayers to Enki for Mirathea's safety, and her growing, bitter resentment towards Ashera. Then she found Arata. The young oracle's mind was a brilliant, terrified star. Mirathea brushed against her dreams and saw her own visions reflected back. The dark tomb, the chained woman, the raging shadow. Arata was the only one who truly saw her, not as a memory or a traitor, but as a living, suffering entity. The child's silent, desperate prayers were a balm and a heartbreak. One day, a new, sharp signal of pain pierced the psychic static. It was Ashera. The acting high priestess sat in Mirathea's old chamber, but the room did not feel like hers. The air was thick with the cloying scent of myrrh she burned to cover the smell of her own anxiety. The vision that flooded Mirathea was visceral. Ashera staring at her reflection in a polished bronze mirror, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. The crimson robes of authority felt like a shroud. The whispers of the other priestesses, once of admiration, were now of suspicion. She had gotten what she wanted, and it was ashes in her mouth. They blamed me for the pox. Ashara's unguarded thoughts slithered into Mirathea's awareness. They say the gods are angry, that the true seer was sacrificed. A wave of corrosive regret, so potent it was almost toxic, washed from Ashera. It was not a clean remorse, but a tangled knot of fear, shame, and furious self-justification. Mirathea did not send comfort. She merely observed, a silent witness to the unraveling of her betrayer. It was a punishment far more fitting than any she could have devised. Her focus shifted to the world outside the temple. She brushed against the weary mind of Commander Lugel, standing his eternal watch at the tomb's entrance. She felt his grudging respect for her solidify into a grim, unspoken loyalty. He was no longer just guarding a tomb. He was guarding her. And then, she found in Merkur. The zealot's mind was a fortress of duty, but cracks were spreading. She saw flashes of his life, the disdainful gaze of King Namtar, the hollow eyes of men he'd executed on false charges, the memory of her own calm face as she walked into the darkness. He was drinking more, his certainty eroded by a gnawing doubt. He was beginning to question the crown he had served so blindly. The most profound change, however, was in the fabric of the tomb itself. As Mirathea's will fused with the ancient bindings, she began to understand them. The glowing glyphs were not mere decoration. They were a language, a complex equation of cosmic law. She learned to read their pulses, to feel the ebb and flow of Nergal's power against them. Her vigil was not passive. It was an active, daily reinforcement of the prison walls. She was weaving her own essence into the seal. During one of these deep, meditative states, she felt a new, foreign presence, not from the world above, but from the deeper dark, from the direction where Anzû, the beast, coiled. It was a simple, primal consciousness, driven by hunger and a base cunning. Lamashtu, the demon midwife. Mirathea felt its attention fix on her, not as a warden or a key, but as prey. It sensed the potent life force that sustained her, a morsel far more tantalizing than the scared soldiers of the past. It began to circle, a patient predator in the psychic deep, waiting for a moment of weakness. Mirathea opened her eyes in the dark. The battle lines were no longer just between her and Nergal. The very ecosystem of the tomb was reacting to her presence. She was the new center of this forbidden universe, a fixed point around which angels and demons, regret and resolve, endlessly turned. She tightened her grip on the cold chains. They were no longer her shackles. They were her anchor, and she would hold the line. A decade bled into the stone, marked only by the deepening grooves the chains wore into Mirathea's spirit. She was 97, then 107. Her body, sustained by the tomb's paradoxical energy, was a relic, but her mind had become a fortress, its walls polished smooth by the constant abrasion of Nergal's will. The direct assaults had long since ceased. They were a wasteful expenditure of energy for the imprisoned god. Now, the conflict was one of erosion, a glacial war of attrition fought in the silent spaces between heartbeats. Mirathea had learned to navigate the tomb's ecology not as an intruder, but as a part of it. Her relationship with its inhabitants had evolved into a fragile, terrifying symbiosis. Anzû, the beast guardian, no longer viewed her as a morsel to be tasted. She felt its vast, reptilian consciousness as a low, constant thrum of awareness in the periphery. She had come to understand it was not merely a mindless animal, but a creature of instinct bound by ancient pacts. On the days when Nergal's frustration peaked, sending tremors through the psychic fabric of the tomb, she would project a wave of calming intent towards the serpent's lair. A shared purpose, however unwilling, had formed. They were both jailers in their way. Lamashtu, the demon midwife, was a different kind of problem. Her hunger was a sharper, more intelligent thing. She did not test the walls of Mirathea's mental fortress head-on. Instead, she probed for forgotten weaknesses, whispering of the specific, aching loneliness of a woman who had never borne children, showing her visions of the young oracle Errata, not as she was, but as the daughter Mirathea might have had, crying out for a mother who was not there. These attacks were the most deft, and Mirathea had to fortify herself with the cold, hard truth. To yield to that particular ghost would be to fail all the children of the world. But the most significant change was in her connection to the world above. It was no longer a mere echo. It was a web Her consciousness had grown so attuned to the psychic vibrations of the tomb that she could use it as a resonant chamber, amplifying her reach. She no longer just listened. She could, with immense effort, send. To Ninlil, she sent strength. Not words, but feeling. The solid, unyielding presence of a friend standing beside her in the dark. She felt Ninlil's spirit, once flickering with grief, stabilize and harden into a core of quiet resistance within the temple. To Errata, now a young woman of 22, she sent knowledge. The girl's natural talent was a wild, untamed thing. Mirathea, in fleeting psychic touches, taught her to focus, to build her own mental shields, to distinguish true vision from fearful fantasy. Errata became her eyes and ears, a living scrying pool through which Mirathea watched the slow decay of Namtar's reign. The pox had ravaged the city. The king's claim of divinity, now a hollow joke whispered in the ashes. And then there was Ashera. Mirathea's connection to her betrayer was a thin, taut wire, vibrating with a painful frequency. She did not send comfort or forgiveness. That was a bridge burned to cinders. Instead, she sent awareness. She allowed Ashera to feel the weight of the chains, the endless, grinding silence, the cold that had seeped into her very soul. It was not an attack, but a relentless, unforgiving mirror. Ashera's life in the sun-drenched temple, with its politics and its power, was now forever shadowed by the visceral reality of what she had consigned her mentor to. Mirathea felt Ashera's nightmares, her waking moments of panic, the way she would sometimes stare at her own hands as if they were stained with tomb dust. It was a punishment more exquisite than any execution. One day, a new and powerful signal shot through the web, sharp as a dagger. It came from Enmerker, the zealot. His mind, once a bastion of dutiful certainty, was in turmoil. He stood before King Namtar, who was now a bloated, paranoid shadow of his former self, raving about new conspiracies. The witch still lives. Namtar screamed, his voice a ragged thing in Enmerker's memory. I feel her. She whispers to my enemies. Find her accomplices. Burn them. Enmerker's faith shattered in that moment. The order was not justice. It was the raving of a madman. The image of Mirathea's calm, accepting face as she walked into the tomb 10 years prior rose in his mind, juxtaposed with the king's deranged fury. The seed of doubt she had planted had finally borne a bitter fruit. Mirathea felt his decision crystallize. He would not carry out the order. He would become, instead, a silent agent of resistance, using his position to slow the king's descent into outright tyranny. A grim smile, a cracking of long-unused muscles, touched Mirathea's lips. The web was holding. Her vigil was not just containing Nergal. It was sending ripples through the world, subtly altering its course. It was then that Ataka's voice returned, not as a whisper, but as a conversation. The seduction was gone, replaced by a tone of grudging, cosmic curiosity. You weave an interesting web, little spider, it hissed in her mind. You take your prison and make it a throne. You take your silence and make it a song. He does not understand. He thinks only in conquest and obliteration. But you think in connections. It is the novelty. Mirathea did not respond, but she listened. She was learning from all of them, the beast, the demon, the whisperer, and the fading god. She was the warden, the nucleus of a dark, twisted family. And her family was growing stronger, even as the world outside began to tear itself apart. The final act was approaching. She could feel it in the tremors that ran through the stone, in the frantic energy of Nergal's silence. He was gathering his strength for one last, desperate push. And she, the witch of the Anunnaki Tomb, was ready. 15 years. In the world above, it was a generation. In the tomb, it was a single, drawn-out breath. Mirathea, 102 years old in body, but ancient in spirit, felt the shift not through her failing senses, but through the web, the vibrations changing, the whispers turning into shouts. King Namtar the Merciless was dying. The news did not come as words, but as a seismic shockwave of panic and ambition that rippled through the psychic connections Mirathea had nurtured. From Errata, she felt a vision of the royal physicians fleeing the palace, their faces masks of terror. From Enlil, a grim satisfaction, a prayer of thanks to the gods of justice. From the weary mind of Commander Lugel, a sharpening of focus, the changing of a guard not just for a tomb, but for an era. But the most potent signal came from Enmerker. His mind, once a fortress, was now a command center for a silent coup. She saw flashes of hushed conversations and torchlit armories, of loyal soldiers being quietly repositioned, of the Queen Damkina finally emerging from her shadowed existence to give terse, decisive orders. The king's madness had become a clear and present danger. His latest decree, to execute half the royal court on suspicion of being tainted by the Tomb Witch's influence, was the final straw. The kingdom was saving itself from its king. And then a new, unexpected thread wove itself into her web. Thin, frayed, and desperate, Ishara, the acting high priestess, was trapped. Her alliance with Namtar had become a death sentence. His guards now watched the temple not as a holy site, but as a nest of sedition. The power she had craved was now a cage. In a moment of pure, unguarded terror, huddled in the sanctum she had stolen, her mental defenses crumbled, and a single, clear plea shot through the darkness, aimed directly at the one person she had betrayed. "Mother, forgive me, what have I done?" It was not a request for rescue. It was a confession, a final, broken acknowledgement of her sin. Mirathea, deep in her stone cradle, received the plea. There was no warmth in her response, no absolution, but there was, for the first time, a use. She sent back not forgiveness, but a single, stark image, the hidden panel behind the tapestry in the sanctum, the one Enlil and Shala had used. An escape route, a chance. She felt Ashara's shock, then a flood of shame-soaked gratitude. The connection snapped shut. Mirathea did not know if she would take it. It did not matter. The debt in some small, cosmic way was paid. The climax came a night later. Mirathea felt the moment Namtar drew his last, rattling breath. It was not a gentle passing. It was a violent severing, a psychic scream that echoed across Uruk and into the depths of her tomb. With it, the last vestiges of his manufactured divine authority, the power that had, in part, reinforced the political legitimacy of her imprisonment shattered. The effect inside the tomb was instantaneous and catastrophic. The stone walls groaned, a deep, agonized sound that had nothing to do with geology. The glowing glyphs flared into a blinding, frantic strobe. The chains holding her vibrated, growing hot to the touch. Nergal, who had been gathering his strength in a brooding silence, saw his moment. The shadow in the center of the chamber coalesced faster than ever before, not as a tempting vision, but as a pure, raging storm of hatred. The crimson eyes were now infernos. "The lock is broken." His voice boomed, not in her mind, but through the very air, shaking dust from the ceiling. "The fool who bolted it is gone. Your time is over, caretaker." A physical force, like a tidal wave of pure malice, slammed into her. It was no longer a test. It was an annihilation. Mirathea cried out, her body straining against the chains, her mental fortress groaning under the assault. She felt Lamashtu stir in excitement, scenting her imminent end. She felt Anzû recoil, its primal mind terrified by the raw power being unleashed. This was it, the final, desperate push. She poured everything she had into the bindings, her memories of sunlight, Ninlil's friendship, Arata's devotion, even Enmerker's redeemed honor. She wove them into the ancient cuneiform, reinforcing the failing symbols with the tapestry of her life. But Nergal's power was immense, fueled by millennia of pent-up rage. A crack appeared in the dais beneath her. One of the glowing glyphs on the wall shattered, its light dying with a pathetic fizzle. "You are dust," Nergal roared, "and dust will be scattered." He gathered himself for the final, shattering blow. Mirathea, her strength failing, knew she could not hold. She had one last, terrible card to play, a forbidden technique from the oldest texts, a fusion of spirit and prison that was irrevocable. But as she prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, a new energy entered the tomb, not from below, but from above. A presence, small, but blazing with pure, untapped power. Arata, The young oracle had felt the turmoil. From the newly peaceful but chaotic city, she had projected her own consciousness, a spear of brilliant white light piercing the tomb's darkness. It was not an attack on Nergal, but a reinforcement of Mirathea, a wave of unwavering belief, of love, of hope. It was a pinprick against a hurricane, but it was enough. In that split second, as Nergal hesitated, momentarily baffled by this new, pure energy, Mirathea struck. She didn't use the forbidden technique. She used a web. She channeled Arata's hope, Ninlil's steadfastness, in Merkur's resolve, and even the terrified, survivalist energy of the fleeing Ishera. She took all the echoes of the world she was protecting and wove them into a single, brilliant cord of light, lashing it around the form of the raging god. Nergal screamed, a sound of pure, universe-spanning frustration. The light cord held, not by brute force, but by the collective will of the humanity he sought to destroy. The shadow dissolved. The pressure vanished. The glyphs on the wall stabilized, their glow settling into a steady, confident rhythm. The tomb was secure. More than secure. It was stronger. Mirathea slumped in her chains, gasping. She was alive. The tomb was intact. And she understood now. She was not just its warden. She was its heart. And as long as there was hope, love, and courage in the world above, she would never truly fight alone. The crown had cracked, but the seal held. The silence that followed the storm was not the same as before. It was an earned quiet, a peace wrested from the jaws of cosmic fury. Mirathea, breathing in ragged gasps, felt the tomb settle around her like a weary beast. The glyphs pulsed with a steadier, deeper light, as if infused with the resilience she had just demonstrated. She had not just survived, she had evolved. The web of connections was no longer a tool. It was a part of her, a nervous system that extended beyond her physical form. But Nergal was a god of eternity, and his strategies shifted with the eons. Direct assault had failed. The chaos of the king's death had been neutralized. Now he would attack the very core of her will, the foundation of her sacrifice. He did not appear as a towering shadow of rage. This time, the vision was gentle, insidious. The cold stone of the tomb melted away, replaced by the warm, sun-drenched courtyard of a small seaside temple, just as Namtar had once promised. The air smelled of salt and blooming jasmine. Mirathea stood, not hunched and chained, but straight-backed, her hands smooth and unlined. She wore simple white robes, and her hair was a soft gray, not the stark silver of the tomb. Before her, on a wooden bench, sat a young woman with emerald eyes and a smile that mirrored her own. Arata, not as a vision from afar, but as a daughter, her head resting on Mirathea's shoulder. "You could have this," a voice whispered, so soft it seemed to be the breeze itself. It was Nergal, but his voice was stripped of menace, filled instead with a profound, sorrowful wisdom. "This is not an illusion of power. It is an illusion of peace. The peace you earned. Let another take up the burden. You have served enough." The vision was exquisitely crafted. Mirathea could feel the sun's warmth on her skin, the weight of Arata's head, the simple, profound joy of a quiet life, unburdened by cosmic duty. It was everything she had sacrificed. It was the life she should have had. "The new king is wise," the voice continued. "The priestess Ninlil is strong, and Merkur is honorable. The world has found its balance without you. It does not need its forgotten witch anymore. It needs a grandmother, teacher, woman at peace." Tears welled in Mirathea's eyes, real tears that felt warm against her cheeks in the vision. The temptation was 1,000 times more potent than the offer of godhood. It was the temptation of irrelevance, of a deserved rest. It whispered that her great work was done. "The seal is strong," Nergal murmured. "It can hold for another age without you. Just let go. Release the chains. They are the only thing holding you here. Step into the sun. It is waiting for you." For a terrifying moment, she wanted to. The accumulated weight of decades of solitude, of cold and darkness, pressed down on her, and the offered peace felt like a pardon from a sentence she should never have served. She looked down at Arata, her daughter in this beautiful eye, and saw the love in her eyes. Then she looked deeper, and she saw what was missing. The subtle scars of hardship that had forged the real Errata's strength. The fierce determination born from loss. This Errata was a doll, a perfect, empty vessel. The vision flickered. Mirathea closed her eyes. Not the eyes of the woman in the courtyard, but the eyes of the witch in the tomb. She reached out through her web, not to the illusion, but to the reality. She found the real Errata, not resting peacefully, but standing vigil in the temple at Uruk, her brow furrowed in concentration, her spirit a blazing torch of vigilance, holding the connection to her mentor, reinforcing the tomb from afar. She was not a child seeking a mother's comfort. She was a fellow guardian standing her watch. She found Enlil, not presiding over a peaceful temple, but quietly, doggedly rooting out the last remnants of Namtar's corruption, her blindness no handicap, but a focus for her profound inner sight. She found in Merkur, not as a retired hero, but as the new captain of the royal guard, his honor tested daily in the complex arena of a rebuilding kingdom. They had not moved on. They had shouldered the burden with her. Her vigil was not a solitary one. It was the anchor that allowed them to rebuild. The sunny courtyard shattered like glass. Mirathea stood once more on the dais, the cold chains firm around her wrists. The jasmine scent was replaced by the tomb's ancient dust. "There's no peace while you exist," she said, her voice ringing with a final, absolute clarity. "There is only the watch, and I will keep it." There was no roar of fury, no psychic blast. From the darkness came only a long, slow exhalation that seemed to drain the warmth from the very air. It was the sound of infinite patience, recognizing a truly immovable object. So be it. The words were flat, devoid of emotion. The final, grand temptation was withdrawn. The war of attrition was over. A new, colder reality began. Nergal did not speak to her again, but his presence did not vanish. It settled, like a glacial ice sheet, becoming a permanent, frozen part of the environment. The tomb was no longer a battlefield. It was a stalemate made manifest. Mirathea understood. He would wait. He would wait for 1,000 years, 1,000,000, for a moment of carelessness, for the day the web of connections finally frayed and the world forgot the witch in the dark. But for now she had won. She had faced the most dangerous enemy, the seduction of surrender, and she had prevailed. She tightened her grip on the chains, her gaze fixed on the glowing glyphs. The vigil continued. It would always continue. She was the warden, and she was awake. 157 years. The number was a meaningless abstraction, a ghost of a calendar that held no sway in the perpetual twilight of the tomb. Mirathea did not measure her existence in years, but in the slow, imperceptible strengthening of the seal, and in the fleeting, vibrant lives that flickered through her web. The world outside had transformed. Uruk of the Sumerian Empire was dust and legend, its story now a whisper in the wind, its place taken by new kingdoms, new gods, new dreams. The language of the cuneiform on her walls was forgotten by all but a handful of scholars, a dead tongue speaking the living truth. Mirathea's body was a monument. Her form, sustained by the tomb's paradoxical energy, was barely distinguishable from the stone itself. Her skin was like polished alabaster, fine and translucent, tracing the delicate architecture of bone and sinew beneath. Her silver hair had grown, a river of frozen moonlight that pooled around her feet, twining with the iron chains that were now as much a part of her as her own skeleton. But her eyes, her emerald eyes, remained alive, burning with a cool, ancient fire. They were the only part of her that moved, scanning the glyphs that told the story of an endless, silent war. The web of connections had changed. The familiar threads of her old life had long since faded into the gentle hum of history. Enlil Shala in Merkur, even the tormented Ashera, their souls had journeyed on, their memories now a permanent, woven strand in the tapestry of her resolve. But new threads had come. She felt the minds of the desert nomads who camped in the shadow of the mountain of Lamashtu, speaking in hushed tones of the jinn-haunted peak. Their simple, primal fear was a form of reverence, a reinforcement of the tomb's taboo. Generations of Lugul's descendants had stood guard at the entrance, the duty becoming a sacred family covenant. They no longer knew the name Mirathea or the story of Nergal. They only knew that the darkness within must never be disturbed. Their unwavering, inherited loyalty was a bedrock upon which her vigil stood, and there were the sensitive ones, the children of every age who could still hear the echo. A young girl in a Babylonian village, sketching the face of a silver-haired woman in the dust. A monk in a distant monastery, feeling a strange, protective urge during his meditations and directing his prayers towards a forgotten mountain. A historian, tracing the faded lines of a Sumerian fragment that spoke of a witch queen who guarded the gate of the gods, and feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the age of the parchment. They were her congregation. Unknowing, unasked, to men they were the source of her strength. As long as a spark of intuition, a fragment of a story, a moment of selfless courage existed in the world, the web held. Nergal was a constant, frozen pressure, a weight at the center of reality. The bargain, the rage, the temptation, these were all chapters in a closed book. Now there was only the weight. He had become a fact of her existence, like the chains or the pulsing light. She no longer fought him. She contained him. Her consciousness was a sphere of perfect, focused will, an event horizon that his infinite patience could not cross. One day, a new presence, sharp and inquisitive, brushed against the outer layers of the tomb. It was not a spiritual touch, but a physical one. Men with tools, driven by a thirst for knowledge and glory, had found the sealed entrance. They spoke in a guttural, modern language, their thoughts buzzing with theories of buried treasure and lost cities. For the first time in centuries, Mirathea exerted her will directly upon the physical world. High above, at the tomb's entrance, the leader of the expedition raised his pickaxe. A wind, cold and sudden, howled down from the peak, snuffing out their torches. The very mountain seemed to groan. From the dark, narrow opening, a single, pristine white flower, a species unknown to any botanist, tumbled out and landed at the man's feet. It was followed by a wave of such profound, ancient sorrow and warning that it felt like a physical blow. The men dropped their tools and fled, a superstitious terror gripping their hearts. The story they told would become another layer of the legend, another reason for the mountain to remain untouched. In the silence that returned, Mirathea felt a familiar, tiny spark. The descendant of Arata, a young woman with the same gift, living in a city of glass and steel, who had jolted awake from a dream of a woman in chains, feeling an inexplicable and urgent need to protect something she could not name. A sense of profound, timeless peace settled over Mirathea. This was her purpose, not to be remembered, not to be worshipped, but to be the silent, steadfast reason why the world could afford to forget. She was the dam against the void, the keeper of the quiet. She closed her burning emerald eyes, not in sleep, but in a deeper focus. The glyphs on the wall pulsed on, their rhythm the only clock in a room beyond time. The chains were cold, the darkness was deep, and the witch of the Anunnaki Tomb kept her watch. She would keep it for all the tomorrows to come. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.